It is an opportunity to bring readers and writers together. The Sunshine State Book Festival that's taking place in January 2023, here in Gainesville, Florida, January 28th. And I will have to tell you that this is some of the most fun I've had in a long time. Being able to meet people all across the country, bringing you their stories and their writing and behind the scenes of how they wrote, why they wrote. And so tonight, I'm thrilled to have Laura Robb from Georgia. You're not in Athens. Where are you? I was about to say Athens, Georgia.
Brunswick.
Brunswick, Georgia. And Joy Castro from Lincoln, Nebraska. We probably would not have thought that this was possible. This is the upside of this pandemic that happened that has so many negative things about it. But the fact that this looks normal now, that we're able to do these kind of interviews with people across the country. Ladies, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you, Pamela.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
The Sunshine State Book Festival, for either of you, is this your first time being at a book festival?
It'll be my first time at the Sunshine State Book Festival, but I've been to other book festivals, so I'm excited to be in Gainesville.
Coming from Nebraska.
Yeah.
That is exciting. So, Laura, what about you?
I have been at a couple of small festivals, one out in Oregon and one in Seattle. But no, this will be the first Florida festival for sure.
So I have to say that you're coming here victoriously.
Yeah. Georgia had a good weekend. There, a lot of happiness spread around the city.
and we will let you in. I talked to a man who actually said, he said, I'm a Gator fan, and all my life I just refused to date anybody from Georgia. I was like, what? It's not that serious. To your books. What and participating in festivals, why is that good for you, the writers, and an added bonus for those who pick up your books? Laura?
That's a good question. I think the chance to meet people and one-on-one have a conversation. I think in some readings and signing events, a lot of people are hesitant to ask a question, to really delve into they don't want to monopolize the mic or anything like that. So it's a much better opportunity to talk to as many people as you can in the time allotted. I think that's the prime for me.
I like them a lot because they're festivals, they're festive. So when I give readings at universities or libraries, that's a different kind of crowd some of the time. They're professors and students, and they have a certain set of questions and interests, but there aren't balloons. There's usually not a lot of good food, right? And at festivals, people are having fun. They're there with their children. They're there because they really love reading and books, and they're excited to meet authors. I think sometimes at universities, people are a little jaded. Like, authors are a dime a dozen coming through university settings. And at festivals, it's just so much fun to meet people you've never met before who maybe have never heard of your work, but are excited. They're excited. They're there to have a great day and to learn about authors that they've never heard of, and to, meet the authors that they're real fans of. And I love to see that energy too. For a writer, it's such a thrill.
Well, probably on a college campus, everybody is expected to write and publish, right? Professors are.
Absolutely, that's right. So books are an ordinary product. Yeah.
Right. So you all write thrillers, correct?
It's true. Definitely mystery with a little thriller touch.
Mystery with a little thriller touch. So as I've talked to you all about, I worked as a journalist, and so it was my responsibility to cover whatever the news was, whatever the news of the day. I had to write and report on that. How do you find your voice to know what it is that you want to write about? How do you come to that? Laura?
Stories, oftentimes the stories come from travel. In the case of this novel, I was down in Fort Pierce, and the story kind of appeared to me from conversations I had with people in Fort Pierce. Sometimes it's stories other people tell me, so that could be a lot of inspiration. I love to hear people's stories of how they met the person they love, um, stories of how they decided to be what they chose as a vocation in life. Those kinds of stories usually involve a lot of really sharp and delineated personalities, and that makes it interesting. I think for any writer, when a great personality presents themselves.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's so true. I think I got hooked on writing short stories because I read Catherine Mansfield. Uh, and I started reading her in high school and then fell in love. And the way that she can take a tiny moment of social friction or injustice or cruelty or betrayal and turn it into this really luminous short story. This just grabbed me, and I thought at the, when I was starting as a writer, I thought the short story was the perfect form. The intensity of a poem, the careful, like jewel-like attention to language, but then also a narrative. But I love writing thrillers too. I think that crime fiction it's the genre of justice. And if we have socio-political commitments that we're passionate about and that we want to think through or we want to share, but we don't want to be didactic, right? We don't want to be preachy. We can make them into a story, a fascinating story that will hook readers and bring them along and let them make their own conclusions. So for me, writing thrillers is what lets me do that. Yeah.
Hmm. So the story is the book that you have there on the screen with you, Joy, One Brilliant Flame. That's your latest?
Yes, it is. It's not out yet. It'll be out in January by the time I'm in Gainesville. Comes out January 3rd. And people can pre-order it now. And it's set in Key West in 1886
Hmm.
among the Cuban revolutionaries. There was a whole Cuban rebel base of the anti-colonial fighters against Spain in Key West. And most people don't know about that. It's pretty much a nearly obscured history. And I wanted to recover it for fiction readers. So there are historical books, scholarly books about it, and they're brilliant. They're fascinating. But a lot of readers don't want to read history. And I thought, oh, this is a really cool era that most of us don't know about. So that's why I plunged in. And it's my own family's history too. So they were in Key West in the late 1800s. And that was a history that was obscure to me. My brother and I didn't know about it growing up. My cousins didn't know about it. We didn't know that our ancestors were anti-colonial, anti-racist revolutionaries, right?
Mhm.
Pro-labor, right? Rabble rousers and all that. We had no idea. It sort of got buried, and sort of a nearly lost Latinx strand of U.S. history. So this was a hugely fun project for me.
Oh, wow. So how does the story go?
Well, there was an actual event in 1886, and it was called in the newspapers of the time the Great Fire of Key West. And it really did destroy the small city, which was an incredibly prosperous little city in Florida at that time because of the cigar industry, the transnational tobacco trade, and other industries too. Sponge fishing was really big in Key West. Anyway, it
Hmm.
was a prosperous little town, and a fire burned the city to the ground. And the authorities at the time did suspect arson, but they could never prove it. So when I heard that, I was at an NEH research seminar one summer, like trying to learn about that history because I was curious about my own family's past.
Mhm.
And when I heard that about the fire, I was like, ooh, that's a crime novel, right? Who set the fire? Why did they set it? Right. So the novel starts uh, several years later in 1898 when the Treaty of Paris was signed. Uh, when Cuba gave up, when Spain gave up control of Cuba. So that's when the novel starts, but then it flashes back. And most of it is set in 1886, and it's told by six different narrators, three young men, three young women, all from different social locations, race, class, sexual orientation. So they're experiencing that really volatile political moment from a variety of different perspectives. And so the novel plays those six different perspectives off each other, and the reader has to like read very actively to figure out what's going on and who really did what. So it was, again, tons of fun.
And so, do we find out who set the fire in your novel?
Yeah,
Ah,
yeah.
sounds
Did you
interesting.
did you have letters and or diaries from family members that
Yeah, fascinatingly, when my father died in 2002, my brother and I found in his papers a printed bound manuscript of a memoir by our great grandfather, an eyewitness account of the period. He had emigrated to Key West in 1869, fleeing the 10 Years' War in Cuba. And then he had been part of that Cuban rebel enclave for decades. So there was that book, and then there was my grandfather's book of poetry, and both were in Spanish. And my grandfather was a lector in a tobacco factory, a cigar rolling factory. So he was a reader who would read the news aloud,
Hmm.
read political theory, and read novels like Les Miserables and The Count of Monte Cristo. So in the afternoons when the cigar rollers were like full from lunch, then they would listen to a good novel, and that would keep people lively and entranced through the afternoon. Yeah. So
how did he
Wow.
do that without microphones? Did he just
yeah,
speak
it was
voice or
It was hard. He gave an interview. I didn't learn about this until doing research recently, but he had given an interview to the Miami Herald years and years afterwards, and he said it was so hard that like yelling basically, because the cigar factories could have up to 500 workers all at benches, so it wasn't quiet, you know. So he would yell, and then he said he would be sweating and sweating and sweating. And it was really exhausting, hard work. So, yep, a completely fascinating, like little niche of cultural. Yeah. Yeah.
That is fascinating, and that you just kind of stumbled on that by going through family papers.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. The documents and the curiosity about my own family. I should say that my father died by suicide. So it was this very tragic, baffling, family destroying moment in our lives. And so we were sort of desperate for anything,
Mhm.
clues about him, about his life, what could have caused him to despair. And so, we were looking at anything we could find, and that was part of the motivation. And so in a way, I sort of wrote this book a little bit for him. I think maybe if he had known more about his past, about the heritage and the history, maybe he would have felt more, I don't know, valued or a part of society or something like that. I don't know, but yeah. So,
Wow. Sounds like a fascinating read. And then this is the part that I like so much about this. You don't necessarily get this. You're not going to get this when you go to Amazon and click to order a book. But your stories will help people, I believe, want to read your books. And Laura, your book is fascinating as well. Please tell us about it.
Well, it's set in St. Augustine, Florida, a little bit farther north than yours, Joy, just the top of the state. And it's set in the current day, but it came out of a trip that I made to Fort Pierce to study Zora Neale Hurston. And in going there, the cultural hosts that were helping us asked, what did we think of the Florida Highwaymen? And most of us in the group just looked blankly at them and they said, oh, goodness, you've got to come with us. So they took us on a little field trip to an art gallery where one of the surviving Florida Highwaymen was showing some of his work. And he sat and just talked to us as if we were long lost friends and told us stories about the Highwaymen, which was a group of 26 artists who, at the time in the 1950s, had no opportunity to show their work at a gallery or in a museum. And so they painted and then took the work out to the highway and sold to tourists. And they became pretty prosperous, the first highwaymen. And so other people in the community saw that as an opportunity, and the group grew. And they started to paint in series. So they would hang up the paintings on the fence in their backyard, and maybe start 7 or 8 canvases at the same time. And one person would do the clouds, and one person would do the trees, and one person would do the beach, and then they would knock out these 8 paintings, get them out to the highway, sell them, buy more materials, do more. And that's how they worked it. So they probably produced 100,000 to 200,000 paintings.
Whoa.
Yeah, that their story is quite fascinating, and probably the same man that you met was just here in Gainesville about a month ago and painted a mural here. These were African American men who were painters whose galleries would not accept their work. So we were blessed in the city of Gainesville to have him come and paint here
Yes,
in
I saw
Gainesville.
that. I saw that he contributed a very large mural, right?
Yeah,
A very
yeah.
large mural to the city's public art. And yes, he was. And now his name is eluding me, but he was the one that had the car
Ah,
when they first began. So he would take the paintings, and also they say, he could sell water to a whale. He was a phenomenal salesman. So he was out on the highways and he was selling, and he really, greased the wheels for that whole operation, because he was so good at what he was doing. And yeah, he's a fascinating man. So yeah, so these paintings, they're huge in numbers. So the idea of making a catalog of them is a bit of a daunting task. So the woman in my novel who gets she volunteers to do this catalog, and she recruits some members of her research club. So the name of the book is the Laguna Shores Research Club. And she recruits one of the older women who's very experienced researcher. And she gets going on this project of tracking down these paintings, and she's murdered. And that's where the story begins. Her
Okay.
murder, for whatever reason, they need to find out.
mm.
And everything else is a bit of a spoiler, but the main character unites with some of the other people in her research club and starts to get to the bottom of this woman's death.
Okay. But she's not a professional sleuth.
She's not, but she did have the job of forensic research for Social Security during her career. So she's pretty good at internet tracing and setting up a network of information so that you can see it visually. So that's her specialty, and that's what she's doing when she she meets her end.
So it starts out that way. You pull the readers in right away because I'm like, ah,
Right. The main character is much younger than she is, and so she has a sort of a mother-daughter relationship with her. So the death is near to unbearable for her. She's just it's quite a loss. So that's what kicks her into action right away. She can't bear the idea that this woman unjustly met her death. She wasn't ready to go, and so she has quite a bit of energy behind the investigation.
wow, you guys have some pretty heavy storylines here. How in the world? And I've asked this before because with the stories that I've written, the characters are already there. I'm just telling what happened. How do you develop the characters and have them doing what they do and keeping the story going? How do you do that?
Well, do you want to go, Joy?
No, go first.
Oh, um, when I wrote this, I was working with a writing group, and one of the women in the group said to me, "Oh, hey, I read this article about biographies, character biographies. You should look at it, and might help you." Because I, in my earlier novel, struggled with getting a lot of depth and emotion into the characters. So I read this, and I started to write biographies of my characters. I just begun the novel, and I wrote page-long biography, included things that you wouldn't necessarily need for the novel. For example, how many siblings did they have? Did they get along with their siblings? Who did they date when they were young? Why did they decide to do the job that they were doing? What car do they drive? How do they dress? All those things that give a character texture. So starting the novel with all those biographies written was really quite a lift. It gave me a lot of ideas for what situations they might get into, and very helpfully what their dialogue would be like when they met each other. So it really helped give them distinctive voices.
I love that. That is a fantastic technique, a fantastic approach. Mine is very different. I tend to be sort of inhabited by voices, like characters just start talking in my inner ear to me. I mean, it sounds weird, but like I'll have a general sense like, okay, I want in this novel, for example, like I want Maceo to be an Afro-Cuban rebel soldier, so a guerrilla soldier. And I want him to have escaped enslavement, which was still legal in Cuba in 1886, bizarrely enough. So I gave him, like a little tiny sketch of a backstory, and then just plunged into writing in his voice, and like discovered him and discovered all 6 of the characters like as I went. And like I would be writing and something would start to feel wrong, and I would just turn a different way. But what I really like to do is give each of the characters secrets. Right? Secrets that they don't tell anyone, and have those secrets intensify the conflict and the friction, right? Because the reader knows what's at stake for that character in this situation, and the reader knows what's at stake for that other character, but the characters don't know what's at stake for each other, which I think is kind of a lot of times like life,
Yeah.
And so I really like writing into the mystery of each character, and like sort of, it sounds hokey, but like letting them like reveal themselves to me in the process. Yeah.
That's a good way of showing a character, because then when you see how they cover their secret,
Yeah.
how they trick or try to mystify other people. You get a much better look at what's underneath the skin. That's
Exactly.
really interesting.
Yep. And what they're
Yeah.
willing to risk, what they're willing to do. Yep, absolutely.
So, Laura, you grew up in New York.
That's right.
You grew up in New York, Georgia, writing a story in Florida. Joy, you're in Nebraska. You still end up in Florida, but you've written the book that you won the award for was Louisiana.
Yeah, one of those, yeah. Yep. And one set in West Virginia also. Yeah. Yeah.
So were you about to say something?
I was just gonna say I'm from Miami originally. That's where I was born. Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Originally from Miami.
Yeah.
Th- So in bringing these characters to life, how do you know it's time to stop?
That is a very good question too. Sometimes the characters are a little too lively for you. They have lots of ideas, things they want to do, that, what's exciting to them, what's interesting to them. You might decide they're going to go to lunch with another character, and all of a sudden they've decided to go out and, drink away the afternoon. Those things can happen, and you don't necessarily want them to. So I guess my answer to the question would be, let it sit for a bit. When you get a character to maybe off track or onto a different path than you had imagined, do it, try it, and then let it sit. See what it looks like in a week or 2 weeks. I also swear by writers groups. My writing group was merciless in their commentary, and we knew each other for quite a bit, for probably 4 years, 5 years, and so we got to be fearless with each other, telling each other what seemed to work, what we understood about what they were trying to say, and whether they were being effective or not, and whether I, same thing turned around, whether I was being effective. So those two ways: let it sit, or get a fearless reader.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds wonderful to have that kind of reflective feedback that you really, really trust. Yeah. For me, I think, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I trusted it. Doesn't mean I liked it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that can be really tough. As you were talking, I was, because if your characters are driving and then somebody else says this should happen or that should happen, how do you balance the two? Because you got to go home with the character.
Right, right, right. We had discussions like that when we tried to tell the other writer, no, she's in love. This character's in love. You have to put her in a scene with this man. She's in love with him. And the character said, no, she's not. And we'd have discussions like that, as though these were men and women in our lives. That's how much we got to know each other's characters.
So how do you manage your characters, Joy?
In terms of knowing when it's done, and when I'm done with them and when they're done with me, I think I'm like trying. So I don't have a writers group. I'm trying the whole time to build to an ending that is explosive, that feels revelatory, that gives me chills, um, both at the level of questions, like closure, at the level of wrapping up most of the loose ends, not necessarily all, if there's a reason to keep one strand open-ended, but then also aesthetic closure, like all the kinds of textual questions that are getting raised on the page. I want those to kind of build to a culmination that gives the reader like this real sense of aesthetic satisfaction at the end too. And when I can get to that, then I feel like, okay, now the draft is done. Now it's just time to revise and polish, So But yeah, characters will go their own ways, their merry little ways. And you either have to rope them back into your plot, or you have to be like, okay, I trust you. Let's see where you want to go. And it could be somewhere better. And then you have to really decide, you're like, how much of a control freak author do I want to be here? So yeah.
It's fascinating to hear you all talk about these people that you write, that you develop.
I,
And what's that?
I was just going to say that I wrote, this might have happened to you too, Joy. I wrote a book set in Washington State, which is pretty cold and rainy. And then when I moved to the setting to Florida, this second book in Florida, all of a sudden, I really did seem like the characters were livelier. I mean, they were outside more. They had more options and things to do. It almost did seem like a group that was a little harder to control than the group in the Washington novel.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, I wanted to ask you a question, Laura. Why was it that you were researching Zora Neale Hurston?
Oh, yeah, thank you, because I wanted to ask that too. Thank you for remembering that.
Yeah.
I applied for a Florida humanities grant. I was teaching, and those grants, they come to the attention of teachers fairly often. And so I applied for that grant and got it. And we had a week-long seminar based at Rollins College there in the park. But we were on a field trip to Fort Pierce to see where Hurston finished her life, finished her career.
Okay.
So that's how that happened. And it was great because then, I got so much material and had it for the next year with my classes. I was teaching history, not literature, but the lit teachers were teaching Hurston. So it really worked. It really dovetailed.
Have you been to her festival?
No, but we did go to it. We just missed it by a week, so that the timing wasn't really correct. But we did go to the museum. We went to see her home and went to the restaurants there in Eatonville. And yeah, it was a wonderful, wonderful week that the state of Florida gave me.
Yeah, even though you're a bulldog.
That was a secret, right? Among us.
Ladies,
there were
this.
Alabamians there.
Say again?
There were some folks from Alabama there, though, too. So
Oh, really? Okay, they were nice to them, too.
a little tense at times.
Yeah, this
Well,
is fascinating. I mean, this could be interesting to everyone who's viewing, because it sounds like you didn't actually go to that seminar looking for material for a novel, or did you?
No, I didn't.
It's
No,
just
I wasn't.
this.
I'd only read one of Hurston's books, and this professor that was leading us, she was familiar with everything, the whole body of her. We read, her short stories and her other novels, and it was a much fuller picture of Hurston when I finished. But it was the group that we were visiting in Fort Pierce that said, "No, you don't know who the Florida Highwaymen are? Okay, that is not acceptable. Let's go meet them." And what occurred to me at the time was, oh, for goodness sakes, how are museums going to deal with a cultural heritage of 100,000 paintings?
Yeah.
How would that be? Especially since they were made and sold for $20 and they now are sold for $8,000, $10,000. Plus, who owns that? Who gets to profit from that? What's up with that?
no doubt they are all over the country hanging on walls and people don't even know what they have, probably. I would guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I hope I can run across one at a garage sale or an estate sale someplace. I would love that. I don't even know if I know what I was looking for.
The bookstore owner in Cocoa, Florida, told me that a woman came. She lives in a sort of at the corner of a neighborhood in Cocoa. The woman came from the neighborhood, brought her this painting, and said, I'm really hard up. I really need to pay a bill right now. And I have this painting. Would you pay me $25 for it? Well, the bookstore owner saw right away. She knew what it was. She knew it was a Florida Highwayman. And she knew because she saw the signature. And she knew that was the telling detail about those paintings. They were almost all were signed by one highwayman and another. And so she said to her, just stay right there. I'm going to make a phone call and I'll see what I can do. And she had a check for $5,000, $6,000 in the woman's hands that day.
What?
Yeah, that the woman. She said the woman was so surprised. She left the store, the bookstore, went home. She didn't say anything. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't say anything. About a week later, she came back and she said, I think I owe you a commission. I was just so overwhelmed.
Wow.
And that woman, her name is Michelle Thompson, the bookstore owner, and she said, no, that's your painting. That wasn't my painting. You don't owe me anything.
Oh, wow.
I know her integrity, her honesty.
Oh, yeah, because she could have taken it and put the $5,000 in her pocket.
Exactly.
Oh, wow. Well, ladies, I think we need to get together for a cup of tea.
That would be lovely.
That would be great.
I really, really have enjoyed talking to you all this evening and look forward to you coming to Gainesville, Florida in January for the Sunshine State Book Festival at Trinity United Methodist Church, where readers and authors come together and they will get to meet you and talk to you and purchase your books that you will autograph for them. So I am excited about meeting you and getting your books also. Just sound like fascinating reads.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for watching, whether you're watching on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. Please like and subscribe and share. And if you're in the Gainesville, Florida area, or make your way here in January for the Sunshine State Book Festival, this is just two of the 150 authors who will be there with all of their books and their wealth of knowledge. One lady said, oh, it was Pat, the chair, who said, it was just fascinating to me as a child when I met an author. I didn't know about people who wrote books.
Yeah.
And so that's the other thing that's so wonderful about these book festivals, for people to actually see the people who write the books. It's not just pulling a book off the shelf. You get to see the people who write the books. Again, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us. We will see you again tomorrow for more authors and conversation. I'm Pamela Marshall at the Wellness Radio TV and at the Wellness Radio TV podcast. Remember, there is healing at the well. Make it a fantastic moment. We'll see you next time.